Hi, everybody. My name is Toni and Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. Today, I have a really special guest, someone who's already had a very illustrious career in medicine, which I'm curious and interested to talk about, but who's now stepped into the foray of writing. So I will say surgeon and author David Weill is with us today. So welcome, David.
Hi, how are you? Good to be here.
It's great to have you here. Your body of work, if you will, up until this point in your life has really been medicine, and specifically transplant surgery. So it's somewhat of a leap, right, to move from medicine into something creative. Although you're going to argue with me, I think that even medicine and transplant work is creative in its own way. Certainly to to create new ways to save lives and to be able to transplant an organ literally from one body to another to save a person is um, it's its own form of creativity. Um, but what made you decide to transition from medicine to being an author?
I always thought that I would do my transplant work for a certain amount of time, even when I was very young and just starting in the field. I figured I had about 20 years in me of doing it just because of the pace of it, and not only the physical part of it, but the emotional part of doing that kind of work and investing everything I had in it, which I did. I think that the writing came really as an outshoot of the work I was doing in the hospital because I would walk around the hospital sometimes late at night by myself. And I always wished there was somebody there that I could show that world to. And so I think through my writing, I've been able to do that, both first in a memoir that I published in 2021, and then most recently with a novel.
Right, the novel is your first foray into fiction, right, which I'm super interested in, because you create a character who is a transplant surgeon, and gets himself embroiled in this sort of existential, dilemma. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, just as you said, Dr. Joe Bosco is a heart transplant surgeon who has issues. He has a very steep rise in his career. He had great expectations put on him by his parents and himself. And as he rose up and up and up in his career and had more success, he eventually got himself into quite a bit of trouble. And I spend the second half of the book trying to see what happens to him to see if he can get himself out of that trouble and redeem himself.
Now, this is a logical question, which you may be getting a lot of, but how much of it did you base on your own experiences?
Yeah, I get that. I get that one a lot.
Yeah, I would
I,
think.
I think that all of the book, really, all the characters, not just the protagonist, Joe Bosco, but all of the characters are based on real people that I saw during the course of my career. The main character is not me. I hope I have more positive attributes than he has, particularly at the beginning, but that's for the people around me to see. I was very much informed by the people that I worked with. The characters in Transplant in real life are rich characters. It attracts a certain kind of people to the field, and I wanted to write those on the page as well. So not only the main character, but a nurse who's very important. One of his assistants is very important in the field, in the book rather, and then a lot of the people that he worked with on the transplant team. So I like to say it's not science fiction; it's fiction, but not science fiction. It's based on real life.
Now, the creative process for you, I mean, did you know going in, did you already have the story mapped out in your head? Did you know what his choices were going to be, where this character was going to end? Or did you just take the journey with him in front of the screen?
More the latter. I had the first part of the book pretty well mapped out, the first part, if you will. So it's sort of a three-part book, and the first part I had pretty well mapped out, but not the second and third. And in fact, I wrote three different endings to the book, finally settling on the one that actually is on the page now, because I wasn't really sure in my own mind how it was going to end. I found that the hardest part of the whole endeavor is landing the airplane.
Well, sure. I mean, I've heard a lot of authors talk about, the attachment, right? They get to a character, fictional or otherwise, people who live in their head, right? And sort of tell them what to do. And I've said many times on the podcast, Matthew Dix tells a great story of like he was writing a character when in the early novel days, he said, and his wife calls, so he stops writing. He's behind the computer and he answers the phone and he says, hello. And he says, but I can't talk. Like his character was just about, it's just coming, he's going up the stairs now. And she said, well, what's going to happen? Is he going to get, is he going to like live or die? Is he going to get, and he's like, I don't know yet. Like, and then it really struck me that he needed to be behind the computer. Like he himself didn't know from minute to minute what was going to happen next. He needed to be behind the screen, and the character just told him the story. And I think that's kind of fascinating. And since then, I've heard it from more than one author who said, you know what, these characters, they lived in my brain, and I needed to be behind the computer, and they told me what their story was. Was it that way for you, or are you, with your medical background, a planner?
Yeah, not with this book. I really couldn't plan it out because this was a totally new endeavor for me. Where I'm fictionalizing events that I knew well, but I didn't know how they all fit together, and I also didn't know really what was going to happen to the main character in the end. Like I said, I had a few different visions for what he was going to ultimately run into, but I chose the one I did because I think it fit the story the best. But in terms of outlining it and plotting it all out, I didn't do that.
So, I mean, moving forward, I mean, do you see this more as a niche for yourself? Because there's a lot of mystery surrounding, I think, doctors. Why does a show like Grey's Anatomy make it 12, 20
Right.
years, right? Because
Right.
as much as we think we know them, we don't. There's sort of a lot of mystery surrounding I think, the world of medicine, the lives of doctors, and especially transplant surgeons. That's a niche in and of itself. Uh, and so I can almost see this as like a series, um, of books that delve into that world. Is that something you're planning, or no? Like next time it's going to be a baseball player and
Yeah, no, I think that is going to be what happens. I think that as you said, I think there is broad interest in what happens in hospitals, and not just patient stories. I think people are interested in what uh, physicians and nurses and other team members go through when they're trying to deliver this kind of care. And, a lot of medical fiction has been about, thrillers, medical thrillers. There's a body missing or something like that. I'm thinking of Robin Cook, back in the day.
Mm.
But I think medical fiction drama of this sort, there hasn't been quite as much of it, and I hope to write more of it in the future. I was talking to my publisher recently, and he's very much interested in my continuing with some of these characters, and I think I'll plan to do that.
a sequel?
Yeah, I think so. I think that one will be coming. I'm actually writing a different kind of book right now that I'm trying to finish. That's going to be nonfiction and totally unrelated to medicine. But I think I'm going to come back after that and write a sequel to this one.
So the passion for writing has definitely bitten you.
Definitely. I like everything about it. Frankly, I like the process of it. After a year of running around the hospital with my hair on fire, I like the quiet of it, frankly.
Sure.
And I've enjoyed it. And I don't think that I'll either write all fiction or all nonfiction. I think I'll probably write both in the future.
What's interesting to me is that I read that when you are a transplant patient, doctor, you always asked your patients a particular question. What would you do if today was your last day? And that was sort of the push behind this book. Is that
Yeah,
true?
it is. I was very interested in the humanities part of medicine. of course, had to become at least adequate at the scientific and medical parts of it. But I certainly was interested in the humanity of it. To me, especially as I look back on it, the human interaction, the personal stories, the seeing people at their worst and their best
Yeah.
was always the most interesting to me. The medicine was great, and obviously, I had to become proficient at that. But I really very much was interested in what makes people tick, and in my field especially, I was interested in what people wanted to do if they got a second chance in life, and I got the opportunity to ask that same question, what would you do if today was your last day, over and over and over again. And I always loved hearing the answers. I wasn't looking for one in particular, but loved hearing the variety of answers.
I would think at that point in the game, you hear a lot about regrets,
Mhm.
you know, something we don't really think about so much, but often you hear when you get to the end of life, what do you regret? What are the regrets? And they're almost never career oriented, right? They're almost never, I wish I had won more trophies or I had spent more time obsessing on my career. Inevitably, they're always the failings that we have personally. I think that dog us in the end. Did you see a lot of that?
I saw a ton of that. As a matter of fact, literally, I probably asked that question maybe 10,000 times during the course of my career, and not one said, I wish I could work a little bit more, and I wish I could, make a little bit more money or have more success or whatever. I never heard that, not once. I did hear a lot about the things that people regretted, and largely around their own interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
I heard tons of that. You know,
Family, kids.
all the above, and family dynamics can be tough, for folks. I heard a lot about that. I heard a lot about spending more time with their friends, paying more attention to their friends, paying more attention to people that had less than they had. I heard a lot about religion, which is the subject of my third book that I'm working on now. I, I I heard a lot of different things. It was a privilege, to be able to get to hear that. It was important. It taught me a lot.
Sure. I mean, at that point, you're their tour guide, right? I always used to say, because I'm an attorney uh, by trade, and initially and I always felt like I was their tour guide, right? Through to what many people was the abyss, right? Like they didn't want to be there in the system for whatever reason that they were. Oftentimes, the end of a marriage, which was breaking up a family and the like, and people just felt like their world was imploding and didn't understand the process. And I was sort of the tour guide through this horrible experience. And in many ways, that's what you are, right? You are the tour guide through what may be the end of somebody's life, or the reboot, right? The person gets a transplant, they get that second chance. One way or the other, you're the transition person, right? Whether they're transitioning to the end or they're transitioning to the remake, to the reboot for themselves. Um, you're that person. So I mean, I think just had this wealth of information because there's no experience like personal experience when you can ask somebody what happened, what'd you say? It's like the difference between hearing a story, let's say from on television or even reading a book, and then knowing somebody who died and came back,
Yeah.
right? And I've had the privilege of talking to a few people who had that experience where they died and they came back and like, wow, that's very different, that firsthand conversation than anything else. So I think you sort of have that very unique perspective of having these people who are right there to get that kind of information and then pour it into whatever it is, whether it's a nonfiction or a fiction book. Really, you're just in this amazing, unique position to do it.
Yeah, I think so. And that hit me pretty early on in my career. I mean, I wasn't quite as evolved as I would have liked to have been when I was, age 30, starting out in all of this. But by the time I got to be age 60, which I am now, I think I understand a lot more about, human nature and about the uniqueness and the privilege of hearing from these folks when they were facing their biggest challenge ever. And I think also patients, especially the one my patients that had such serious medical conditions, I think they'll tell me anything. I really do. I think they don't hold back. They're very transparent. There's no more BS at that stage. And so I think those frank conversations are things that I do use to inform my writing because I don't think many people have had the opportunity that I did. And I feel like I want to share it.
Well, that's a rawness that, most authors don't have the ability to draw from. Um, Even if you're creating something fictionalized, and maybe you have an experience you or a relative may have gone through, but there's something telling in the universal experiences, things that ring true over and over again,
Yeah.
right? That allows you to scientifically in any way almost gather data, right? Things that just keep ringing true. Um, and I think that's such a raw piece of life that you're talking about, when people are at this crossroads of what will be. And they are being honest, as you just said, there's no more pulling any punches, there's nobody to impress. You're kind of at the end of what may happen. And I think for you to be able to gather that kind of raw data, and then that's a perspective no other author is going to bring you.
Yeah, I hope that when I write, I can actually do justice to the conversations I had. That always concerns me a little bit because there's one thing experiencing all of this, and then there's another thing putting it onto the page where the reader can experience it as well. And I think that's the challenge for me. And I'll leave it to the reader to see whether or not I succeeded or not. But that's really when I sit down to write, I really try to bring the reader into the room with me where I had these conversations, and to me, that's the hardest part.
What's your favorite part of this book?
I love how the book started. I worked really hard on the beginning of the book because I wanted to set the scene and set the stage for the book, I'm very happy with that. But I think even more than that, I'm happy with the dialogue and the relationships that my main character Joe had with people that was revealed through some of the dialogue, whether it be with his work wife, who is the head nurse of his transplant unit, whether or not it's a young lady that he met when circumstances weren't so great later in the book, and I won't spoil what those circumstances were, whether or not it's the conversations he had with his parents who had very high expectations of him. He actually talked to a New York Times reporter during the course of the book. And I liked writing that dialogue as well. So,
Which you have yourself. I mean, right? You've been interviewed by a lot
yeah,
of them.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I have. And, reporters interest me. And that's why I wanted to include one, because they're so good at asking questions. And I think that's it makes for good dialogue or the potential for good dialogue in a novel.
agreed. Also, the proceeds, I believe the proceeds are being exclusively donated to a charity. Am I correct?
Yeah, my wife Jackie and I feel very strongly about an organization in New Orleans called Youth Empowerment Project that helps under-resourced kids with after-school programs and job interviews and things of various sorts. And we decided when I was about halfway through drafting the book that we were going to donate all the proceeds of the book to that organization. We feel very strongly about it, and she serves on the board of directors of it.
Well, that's an amazing gift.
Yeah, we think it's important. I mean, we've had a lot of good luck come our way, so we wanted to share some of that.
Well, and certainly I'll also put up a link to the organization. People can read about and learn more about it. Um, where can people find out about you?
I'm easy to find. I have a website called davidweill.com that really has, yeah, my books, but my consulting practice, op-eds that I write for various publications, almost anything about me. And I'm on all the usual social media platforms at David Weil, MD, on those platforms. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Before I let you go, I mean, we'll put up the link, of course, to your website. Um, and the book is just an amazing new adventure for you. And I'm thrilled to see that, right? It's not often you get to see somebody segue midway, and I think that's a very good example to set that you don't have to just be one thing throughout your lifetime, right? You don't, whatever it is you are, you can always reinvent yourself and be something else. The idea, I think, is to keep finding the joy in your life, even in your work. So I think that's a great example of that you're setting. But before we leave the interview, I have to say, could you share at when you were a transplant surgeon, was there any particular moment that was the most impactful for you? Like the moment you remember, like for the rest of your life? Did you have a moment like that?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of moments like that. I had, high highs, a young girl in particular that I write about in my first book called Exhale, in my memoir, where I love this girl like a daughter, and we transplanted her, and she went on to do great things, climb mountains, jump out of airplanes, much to my chagrin, do all kind of spirited things that every single day showed us why she wanted the transplant, why she wanted to stay alive. She really got everything out of it. But on the flip side, we lost patients I cared about a lot. And in fact, I wrote about in my first book, losing a patient toward the end of my 20 years in the hospital doing this kind of work and taking a long walk back to my office from the ICU and deciding that I was going to step out. And
Mm.
6 weeks later, that I was gone. And we
Profound,
all,
right?
yeah, we all have, I think, an ability for empathy and compassion, but it's not limitless. And I found at that stage of my career that it would probably be best if I stepped out.
Yeah. That's one of those messages also, I think, that you send, for self-care,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you're gifted, clearly, gifted surgeon. But do you know what I'm saying? Do you have to stay in that the other way, or can you the whole time of your life, or can you give back to society in another way? And I think what you're doing is just another way of giving back to society, right? Now you have this wealth of knowledge that you're able to put into interesting stories and tell the stories that people love hearing, love knowing about, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all kind of a learning curve, right? We're all trying to make our way through. We're all trying to figure out the way, the way to be happiest, the way to live our best life, the way to get to the end maybe and not have so many regrets, learning from other people's experiences. So I think you're giving back to society in a whole new way, to your credit. So I applaud
Yeah.
you.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm trying to, I thought when I left the front lines of medicine that I would find it very difficult to replace certain aspects of it. And I have found that that's difficult, particularly the one-on-one conversations with patients. That's hard to replace. But what I have found, and I've been lucky to find, is other ways to contribute to the whole mission, which is to help patients. I mean, a lot of patients read my book. A lot of people in healthcare read my books. And I think if it gives them any comfort or information or anything else, that's all a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Well, again, I applaud you for making this move. I think you are a beacon of light, when it comes to self-care and reinventing yourself. I love the idea that you're putting so much of what you learned or accumulated into something like this, into the human experience. Right? Because we read and read and read and read, and at the end of the day, aren't we reading other people's stories for exactly that? To see ourselves on the page, to learn more about those that surround us, just to keep learning and keep learning. Fiction, nonfiction, it's kind of all the same. We just absorb it up, and it's for that reason. So,
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly, and I appreciate the comment.
so thank you for being here. I hope that when you write your sequel, that you or your next book comes out, that you will come back and talk to me about it.
It'd be a privilege. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to do that.
Thank you. Now, I know your time is limited. You literally squeezed me in, so I appreciate it. And I'm going to let you go.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.